The president held talks with Burundian Prime Minister, who thanked him for Egypt's continued support to his country to provide its development needs, as well as Egypt's stance in backing Burundi on all regional and international forums. The meetings also tackled latest regional developments of mutual concern, especially that related to the Great Lakes, East Africa and the Nile Basin. Separately, the President Sisi met with the President of Comoros, Azali Assoumani, who is the current President of the African Union. President El-Sisi said Egypt is willing to convey its experience in leading the African Union to the Comoros and to activate joint cooperation with the Comoros in different fields. For his part, President Azali appreciated leading Egyptian governments and people's roles in the African continent. The two leaders exchanged points of view over pressing African issues and continued consultations over finding solutions for African crises. Also, President El-Sisi met with Zimbabwe's President Emerson Mnangagwa, stressing Egypt's keen interest to boost relations with Zimbabwe in trade exchange and investments, whether at a bilateral level or as part of the Common Market for Eastern and Southern African countries, COMESA. President El-Sisi said that cooperation fields with Zimbabwe include technical capabilities building and infrastructure support, as well as coordination and consultations on the leadership level over joint African action issues. For his part, President Mnangagwa said he was looking forward to enhancing bilateral ties with Egypt, notably in economic and commercial fields. Appreciating President El-Sisi's role in tackling African issues and expressing willingness to boost integral efforts with Egypt in facing African challenges. And President El-Sisi met with the head of the African Union Commission, Moussa Faki, during which they discussed main topics raised on the African Union's agenda, notably economic integration, regional engagement, peace and security, and the institutional reform of the AU. The two sides agreed on continuing close coordination in light of Egypt's position as a key driver for joint African action in order to tap on the leading Egyptian political and development role in serving African continent's interests effectively. Also, President El-Sisi met with Nordos Bekele Thomas, the CEO of the new Partnership for Africa's Development, NEPAD, the economic development arm of the African Union. The meeting followed up the implementation of priorities set by Egyptian presidency of the NEPAD program between 2023 and 2025 through securing needed financial resources for continental projects within Africa's 2063 development agenda. The president held another meeting with COMESA Secretary General Cheleche Mbato Kempawe. The meeting followed up in the implementation of the most important priorities for the current Egyptian presidency of the COMESA, including strengthening regional supply chains among the COMESA countries, maximizing industrial integration, increasing investment in cross-border infrastructure and interconnection projects. The two sides tackled consultations needed to guarantee a smooth delivery of the COMESA presidency from Egypt to Zambia. And joining us over the phone to tell us more about these meetings is Dr. Zinab Nawar, a professor of economics. Good evening to you, ma'am.
Good morning. Good evening, my dear. Good evening.
Can you tell us the importance of having these African Development Bank meetings? Why is it important for the continent?
Yes, actually, my insight for this important event, actually, that if we talk about the African Bank, this is one of the most respectable and dedicated and hard working in terms of the type of projects that they used to work on, especially in Africa.
Mm-hmm.
You know that Africa needs a lot of support and needs a lot of developmental projects. So the African Development Bank actually has a great effort in that in Africa. Also, that we are hosting this event as Egypt. This is very important and implies also the importance of Egypt and how we are supporting Africa, of course, and how that also we are seeking a good and a deep cooperation between all of these, what we can say that these developing banks, and also within the African countries and also with Egypt. And this is what we are truly seeking, a developmental project that would serve the community, with the growth and also with high probability of jobs and value add to the economy.
Yes. One of the main focuses of today's opening inaugural session was the idea of the effects of climate change on the continent and how the continent as a whole could sort of tackle this major issue when it comes to their economies.
Yes, of course. Unfortunately, if we talk about Africa and the continent, we are facing the continent facing a lot of problems and a lot of issues because of the crisis, the international crisis that we do have, Russia-Ukraine war, and also before that it was Corona. So if we are talking about the African countries with our developing ones, again with weak economies, so definitely the way and also the magnitude to deal with all of these crises is very weak. This is why there should be more focus with the African countries to achieve the development, and also how the African countries can do that is through the cooperation with developmental banks and developmental multilateral institutions.
So how can the African Development Bank help out countries within the continent itself to develop when it comes to green energy and combating climate change?
Would you please repeat the question once again? I'm sorry.
How can the African Development Bank help other African nations in general combat the effects of climate change and move towards green energy?
To combat the effects of these crises that we do have, that most of the countries, worldwide countries, they had thought again is going and to think of their localization of their resources. Unfortunately, this what I can say, this multiple crises we do have on the world scale, that it draws all the attention of all of the countries around the world is to look for their local resources rather than to globalize. And this is very enormous. Given the situation in Africa, we know that in Africa we have a huge continent with a huge resources and huge number of raw materials and probabilities of, if we talk about, and capacities of the human resource and capacity of the what we can say rich material in Africa is rich in the raw material in different aspects. So how the African countries, they have to stop fighting and they have to stop this type of civil wars and to look for what they truly have. This is very important, to just ignore all of these political problems that they have and to focus on their economic and future perspective, because if they didn't think about that nowadays, we don't want to once again to go back to what we had been used to have it before in terms of the use of the resources from other countries and all of that. So for the African countries, they have to focus on their own countries and they have to use the resources. And I think that although we have an international crisis, but still opportunities are there for the developing countries to work on themselves and to use the rich material and the rich, what we can say, gifts that they do have from the God.
Are the meetings, when they're talking about the development of the continent and sort of increasing the capacity of industry within the continent itself, are they effective in meeting the 2063 development goals for the continent?
Of course, they are effective, of course, because if we are going back to the history, we'll see that along different decades, Africa had been used, unfortunately, for the sake of other countries in Europe and for other countries and for other reaching and developed ones. It is the time now for the African countries to work for their own developmental projects, to seriously look how they can use their own resources, how they can cooperate with countries like Egypt. All of that, of course, would be chances for the African countries and for all of the continent. The two challenges that we do have now is how the countries have to focus on themselves. This is very important, and to focus with their own resources. And of course, to cooperate and just to forget about and ignore any political issues, because this is the time of the African and this is the time for Africa.
Okay, Dr. Zainab Nawara, Professor of Economics, thank you so much for joining us over the phone. We're going to take a short break and move on with the rest of the episode. Moving on, still on the African Development Bank, the Prime Minister, Dr. Mustafa Madbouli, asserted that it is time for the world to look at Africa as a priority for development projects. The Prime Minister's remarks came during his participation in the high-level presidential dialogue session about the structure of the changing global financial system and the role of the multilateral development institutions, which held during the activities of the African Development Bank Group's annual meeting. Madbouli also said that the African continent needs a huge amount of financing, about $2 trillion over the next 10 years, to deal with climate change issues and sustainable development goals, as well as $100 million annually for infrastructure projects. Iran has appointed Ali Reza Nayati as an ambassador to Saudi Arabia following a China-brokered deal in April between Tehran and Riyadh that ends years of political rift between the two regional rivals. Ali Reza Nayati served as an assistant to the foreign minister and director general of the Persian Gulf Affairs at the ministry, according to Iran's judiciary news agency Mizan. Within the participation of President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, the 32nd Arab Summit kicked off last Friday in the Saudi city of Jeddah. Arab leaders and delegations representing different Arab nations took part in the summit. President al-Sisi's participation in the summit comes within the framework of Egypt's keenness to strengthen and develop relations with Arab countries. It also is within the framework of Egypt's role of boosting efforts to advance mechanisms of joint Arab actions for the benefit of all Arabs. The summit aims to promote Arab interests, especially in light of the regional and international challenges and crises. The summit witnessed the participation of Syria after years of suspension, as well as a speech from Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. On the sidelines of the Arab Summit last Friday, President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi held a number of meetings with Arab leaders. The president held talks with the Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, where the Crown Prince welcomed the president and praised the Egyptian-Saudi relations between both countries. For his part, the president praised the distinguished ties between them, congratulating the Crown Prince as Saudi Arabia assumed the Arab Summit's presidency from Algeria. The meeting also tackled ways of boosting bilateral relations and partnership between the two countries. The president also received at his residence in Jeddah Tunisian President Kais Saied, where they exchanged views on a number of issues of common concern, specifically the situation in Sudan and Libya. The two leaders agreed to intensify coordination to solve regional crises, as well as maintaining the security and stability of the Arab people. President al-Sisi also met the Lebanese Prime Minister Najib Mikati. During the meeting, the president praised the distinguished relations with Lebanon on the official and popular levels, wishing success to the Lebanese government at such a critical time in the nation's history. Meanwhile, Mikati praised Egypt as a key pillar in maintaining security and stability for the country and the entire region. He also praised Egypt's development experience as a role model to follow. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has remained in power for 20 years by repeatedly surmounting political crisis, mass protests, corruption allegations, an attempted military coup, and a huge influx of refugees fleeing Syria's civil war. Now the Turkish people and economy are being pummeled by sky-high inflation. Yet Erdogan enters a runoff election as a strong favorite against opposition leader Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu after falling just shy of a victory in the first round of voting. He has swayed many Turks in his tide by the way he navigates the world stage, showing that his country has an independent streak as it engages with the East and West. Erdogan's popularity at the moment of economic crisis also seems to be derived from the mere fact of his endurance. Many people seem to want some stability. He received 49.5% of the votes in the first round, 4 percentage points ahead of Kılıçdaroğlu, a social democrat who has led the country's main opposition party since 2010. The economist and former member of parliament has promised to undo Erdogan's economic policies, but his campaign has struggled to entice Erdogan's supporters. Turkey is a key member of NATO because of its strategic location at the crossroads of Europe and Asia, and it controls the alliance's second largest army. Under Erdogan's rule, Turkey has proven to be an indispensable and at times troublesome NATO ally. Erdogan has boasted about Turkey's military-industrial sector on the campaign trail, citing homemade drones, aircrafts and a warship. The message appeared to resonate with voters. The biggest threat Erdogan faces at the moment is the economy. His opposition promises to repair the economy and uphold women's rights to wear the Islamic hijab in schools simply did not resonate in the country's conservative heartland. The head of the World Health Organization urged countries on Monday to carry out reforms needed to prepare for the next pandemic, hailing their historic decision to accept a major budget hike at the UN agency's annual assembly. Speaking at the assembly weeks after ending the global emergency status for the COVID-19 pandemic, he said it was time to advance negotiations on preventing the next pandemic. The 10-day annual World Health Assembly in Geneva, which coincides with the WHO's 75th anniversary, is set to address global health challenges, including future pandemics, eradicating polio, and supporting steps to ease Ukraine's health emergency triggered by Russia's invasion. The WHO's 194 member states are now drafting a pandemic treaty, which is up for adoption at next year's assembly. Moving to business and finance, U.S. President Joe Biden and House Speaker Kevin McCarthy could not reach an agreement on how to raise the U.S. government's $31.4 trillion debt ceiling within just 10 days before a possible default that could sink the U.S. economy, but vowed to keep talking. Here's the story.
Republicans in the U.S. House of Representatives said they were making little progress in negotiations with the White House over raising the government's $31.4 trillion debt ceiling, with the nation facing the risk of default in as soon as 9 days. Aides for U.S. President Joe Biden and Republican House of Representatives Speaker Kevin McCarthy convened again on Tuesday. The two parties remain deeply divided about how to rein in the federal deficit, with Democrats arguing wealthy Americans and businesses should pay more taxes, while Republicans wanting spending cuts. The Treasury Department has warned that the federal government could no longer have enough money to pay all its bills as soon as June the 1st, which would cause a default that would hammer the U.S. economy and push borrowing costs higher. Biden and McCarthy emerged from a Monday meeting on the debt ceiling, talking about the need to find bipartisan compromise, even as they cling to policies that expose the divides between the two parties. Biden and Democrats want to freeze spending in the 2024 fiscal year at the levels adopted in 2023, arguing that would represent a spending cut because agency budgets wouldn't match inflation. The idea was rejected by Republicans who want spending cuts. Biden wants to cut the deficit by raising taxes on the wealthy and closing tax loopholes for the oil and pharmaceutical industries. McCarthy said he will not approve tax increase. Even when Biden and McCarthy reach a deal, they will still need to sell it to their caucuses in Congress. It could easily take a week to pass a deal through the House and Senate, which would both need to approve the bill before Biden could sign it into law.
Lebanon is likely to be placed on a grey list of countries under special scrutiny for unsatisfactory practices to prevent money laundering and terrorism financing. Being added to the list would be another major blow to a country in a financial tailspin since 2019, struggling to secure a deal from the IMF. The local pound has lost more than 98% of its value, plunging most of the population into poverty, and diplomats have been expressing concern for months that the increasingly cash-based economy could hide growing illicit flows of money. A diplomatic source said the cumulative score of the evaluation puts Lebanon one mark over the threshold to be grey-listed. Lebanon's Deputy Prime Minister, Saad Shami, who is heading the country's talks with the IMF, had not seen the draft report and declined to comment on the impact it might have on talks with the lender of last resort. A second diplomatic source familiar with the matter said the draft document was already lenient, given the collapsing state of the Lebanese economy. Anything but grey listing would be a scandal. Economic growth in the Eurozone edged down in May at a 3-month low because of drops in industrial production, according to a closely watched survey published on Tuesday. For the 5th month in a row, growth in the 20-country single currency zone remained in the positive territory, but growth is now at its lowest level since February. Meanwhile, inflation remains stubbornly high, maintaining pressure on the ECB to raise rates. Services' strong showing came even as inflation in the Eurozone bubbles far above the European Central Bank's 2% target. The services sector in the Eurozone, heavyweight Germany, led the region's growth in May. Private sector activity there posted its strongest expansion for 13 months, while manufacturing suffered a sharp fall. France, the Eurozone's second largest economy, saw growth in overall activity slow to its lowest level in 4 months, weakening in both services and manufacturing. Moving to science and technology, a SpaceX capsule carrying 2 Saudi astronauts docked with the International Space Station as part of a private mission chartered by Axiom Space.
A SpaceX capsule carrying 2 Saudi astronauts docked with the International Space Station on Monday as part of a private mission chartered by Axiom Space. Rayana Barnawi, a scientist who became the first Saudi woman to go into space, and Ali Al-Qarni, a trained fighter pilot, are the first 2 people from their country to fly to the orbital outpost. The 4th crew member is American businessman John Schaffner. About 2 hours after docking, the quartet entered the ISS, where they joined the 7 astronauts, 3 Russians, 3 Americans, and an Emirati already on board. The SpaceX rocket blasted off from Florida on Sunday, and the trip to the ISS, which orbits around 250 miles above the Earth, lasted about 16 hours. This mission, named AX-2, is the second fully private mission to visit the space station, following a first in April 2022. The members of AX-2 will stay about 10 days and carry out some 20 experiments. NASA is trying to seed a commercial space economy in the region of space known as low Earth orbit, allowing it to focus its own energies on missions deeper into the solar system and beyond. The Axiom Mission 1 launched last April, with the Seas for 3 private astronauts accompanying an Axiom-employed astronaut reported to cost $55 million each. The cost of Seas for AX-2 has not been disclosed.
As we speak right now, Al Ahly is playing against MP, winning so far 2-0. Al Ahly, fresh from reaching the African Champions League final, is looking to continue their impressive run in the Egyptian Premier League when they face MP today. The Red Devils are determined to reclaim the league title, which they lost to arch rival Zamalek over the past 2 seasons. Despite their last league match being on April 17th, Ahli sit atop the table with 53 points, holding a 1-point advantage over second-place Pyramids, despite playing 5 fewer games. However, captain and goalkeeper Mohamed Shanawi will be absent from the game due to 3-match suspension. Maintaining an unbeaten streak of 21 league game matches, the Cairo Giants are eager to extend the remarkable records against the resurgent Impi, and they still play as we speak. In Europe, Juventus were handed a crushing 4-1 defeat at Lodi Empoli on Serie A on Monday after they were docked 10 points in a new ruling over their transfer dealings, which makes it unlikely they qualify to the Champions League. 2 goals by Francesco Capoto and strike from Sebastiano Loporto made it 3-0 for Empoli just after half-time before Federico Chiesa pulled a goal back for Juve 5 minutes from the Roberto Piccoli sealed Empoli's win in stoppage time. Juve, who learned about the new verdict shortly before kickoff, dropped from 2nd to 7th following the points deduction. They are on 59 points, 1 behind Roma, who occupy the final European qualifying place in 6th and 5 adrift of 4th-placed AC Milan, just 2 games left. Moving to the world of tennis, former world number 1 Simona Halep has accused the International Tennis Integrity Agency, ITIA, of seeking further delay in her independent tribunal doping hearing and said she is being denied her right to be heard. The 31-year-old former Wimbledon and French Open champion has been provisionally suspended since October 2022 after testing positive for the banned blood booster Rodoxstat at the US Open last year. Halep has strongly denied knowingly taking the banned substance and has said she has evidence to show that small amounts of the anemia drug entered her system from a licensed supplement that was contaminated. Halep has said she sent evidence about the contamination to the International Tennis Federation in December and hoped her case would be heard by an independent tribunal in February, but that it was postponed and a new date in March was also put back. Finally, France will deploy 35,000 security agents and the military to secure the 2024 Olympic Games opening ceremony in a river parade through the heart of Paris, from security threats including drone strikes. Hundreds of thousands of spectators are expected to line the Seine River along the 6-kilometer route to watch the national delegation sail in a flotilla of boats from the Austerlitz Bridge to the foot of the Eiffel Tower. Following a COVID-hit Tokyo Games held behind closed doors, Paris promises a sporting spectacle open to the masses. It faces multiple security risks from strikes conducted with drones and cyber attacks to climate activists and anti-government protesters. Paris 2024 organizers have been planning to install the Olympic flame on the Eiffel Tower, although not atop the monument. Darman said is expected more than 600,000 people would attend the Games, which launch in the event, and include 100,000 people who will be paying up to 2,700 euros each for a seat on the river's lower banks. This brings us to the end of this episode of Nile TV Newsroom Live, but stay tuned for more.